I learned early that the directorate didn't mind lies, as long as they held their shape. A lie could be a beam, load-bearing, quiet, never mentioned in official plans. You ran it across the gap between what the public wanted to believe and what the numbers allowed, then built policy on top. As long as nothing collapsed in view of a camera, nobody cared how many truth bolts you shaved off to make it fit. The ring taught me that. The ring was a commercial torus in low Earth orbit. 42,000 residents, triple that in tourists rotating through. A micrometeor shower punched 3 spokes at once. Fire control and atmosphere was going to fail somewhere. The only question was where and how many compartments you wrote off. Regulations wanted a staged shutdown. My own models, the quiet ones I kept off the directorate consoles, put it simpler. Vent a full quadrant now, or lose the station. 13,000 dead instead of 42. Nobody wanted that number attached to their name. So I authorized a localized emergency blowdown. That's the phrase I used on the record. The valves opened in a pattern nobody had pre-approved. It worked. The ring survived. 13,000 did not. By the time the inquiry convened, the bodies counted in my private notes had become 7,000 in the official log. The investigators saw the mismatch. They also saw tourist contracts, political donations, and the fact that I had done what they would have done if they'd been willing to sign it. They censured me in public and promoted me in private. My place clarified. Command track was over. I was the man you sent where you needed reinforced deniability. Which is how I ended up on ISS Vigilance, running a quiet intercept toward the anomaly at the White Eye, with orders thin enough to burn through if anyone ever waved them under a court's nose. The anomaly came into view on forward scope as a ragged haze around the white dwarf. Range bars ticked down. Rohan Cole grunted from the navigation station a few meters below my command cradle. "The swarm is coherent," he muttered. "Mass profile's wrong for rubble. No relative drift inside tolerance." Rohan always talked like that. Maps and tolerances, never feelings. He grew up in the liner lanes between Saturn and the Belt, where a wrong decimal killed 100 people you never met. He thought in blind spots and alternative routes. "Put it on main," I told him, leaning forward. The forward display resolved the haze into a ring, then into a near-continuous shell. The White Eye itself sat at center, a white dwarf so compact its gravity drew light into a tight halo. Around that halo something had been built. A shadowing surface, almost complete, wrapped like a casing. The automated analysis overlay did its best, outlining spans and segments, but the surface showed a single seamless expanse with no recognizable panel joints. An unbroken horizon of pitted pale material curved all the way around the star. Vigilance was an inspection platform the Directorate had deprecated on paper years ago. In reality, she did the work no flagship wanted credit for. Evidence sweeps, quiet demolitions, the odd unsanctioned boarding. Her sensors were tuned for lies. False transponder codes, fake rubble fields, hidden hangars. They had never handled anything on this scale. Behind me, a chair creaked. Wesley Quinn pivoted in the science cradle, pushing his hair back with both hands, like he was trying to rearrange his thoughts by moving his scalp. "That's fabricated," he breathed. "The stress pattern has to be managed. Look at the limb darkening. There's redistribution. Someone wrapped a star." Quinn was a systems theorist. The Directorate kept a few of his type around for when infrastructure started behaving in ways spreadsheets couldn't predict. His loyalty was to models, not nations. The only flags he cared about flew over datasets. On my right, Security Chief Jock Drago folded his arms. Heavy shoulders, old military tattoos peeking from under his uniform cuffs. Jock treated anything unknown as a weapon until proven otherwise, and sometimes even then. "Someone wrapped a star," he repeated, and then walked away since the dwarf's cold. Nobody home, no power spikes. Could be a carcass. Could be a trap built by people who understand our curiosity. His eyes stayed on the tactical overlay, not the visual feed. Men like him trusted numbers about as much as they trusted strangers. Pictures were for propaganda. Our mission orders, delivered in a narrow band burst 6 weeks back, had boiled down to 3 words: enter, assess, leverage. No insignia, no public beacon, nothing to connect vigilance to Earth if the whole venture went sideways and another block happened to be watching. Enter the structure, secure any control interfaces, and figure out what parts of it could be bent into a weapon, a factory, or a bargaining chip. Losses acceptable up to 70% of crew, as long as the hull made it home with something worth the fuel. I watched the shell grow on screen. At this range, the dwarf's light had flattened to a hard white circle in the center. The surrounding structure was a dark ring cutting across that glare, its dull skin broken by irregular pits and ridges. Rohan tilted the display, adjusting our vector. The shell's nearest surface slid into better view. Resolution threshold in 10 seconds, he murmured. The image sharpened. The surface stopped being a smooth ring and became rough, mottled, uneven. Raised ridges, depressions. I frowned. Magnify that sector. I pointed at a patch just off our bow. The display zoomed in. Skulls. The shell's skin was a continuous expanse of bones, but they had been modified, flattened, stretched. Cranial domes cut, pressed, and fused into plates laid edge to edge. Long bones shaved of ends, stacked as reinforcing ribs. Vertebrae stitched together into arcs that distributed load along the curve of the shell. Everywhere the same pale material, but in each tile I could still see what it had been. Somebody's head, somebody's leg. Tell me that's just morphology similarity, Jock muttered. No. Quinn's hand hovered, trembling over his console. Spectral scan on that albedo. Calcium phosphate composite, trace collagen. That's bone. Human bone. The ship went quiet enough that the noise from the ventilation system felt loud. I forced my breathing to stay in the background of my thoughts. Reactions could come later. How many? My voice came out level. Quinn's fingers tapped through menus. You see the scale. Shell radius roughly 1 AU, maybe slightly less. Thickness, unknown, but even a skim coat for that area would... He broke off. Plenty. I finished for him. Plenty of dead you don't need to count. I switched channels. All hands, this is Pierce. We are approaching an artificial shell around the white eye. Composition. Processed human skeletal material. Repeat. Human origin confirmed at structural scale. We maintain approach vector. No commentary on open channels. No leaks to personal logs. That's an order. Jock glanced up at me. You're keeping us on course. The terms didn't change, I answered. If anything, they got clearer. Whoever built this has leverage over time and biology. The Directorate will not let someone else take that. His mouth tightened. He didn't argue. Jock saved debate for times he could put a gun on the table to make his point. Launch a micro-drone, I told Rohan. Sampling profile, minimum thrust. I want a material scrape off that surface before we take vigilance inside. A service drone detached from under our bow, a dull cone with its own independent field bubble. It dropped on a slow intercept toward the shell. On my left, status bars crept along. The drone's camera feed came up, a fast-growing patch of bone horizon. Ridge upon ridge of compressed, fused skeletal elements. Darker lines where former vessel channels had been laid into grooves, repurposed as conduits. The drone contacted the shell with hardly a bounce. Its manipulator arm extended, microcutters nibbling at a cranial tile. Displays filled with curves as the onboard lab ran the sliver through composition and dating. I'm getting isotope ratios, Quinn muttered, eyes locked. Strontium, carbon, cosmic ray spallation levels. That can't be right. Explain in plain language, I told him. The bones are old, he answered. Impossibly old. More exposed to high-energy flux than anything from our era could be. When you run the numbers, the age comes out. Negative. I stared at him. Negative. In reference to now. These bones have signatures consistent with material that spent a long time in a radiation environment we haven't reached yet. Chronometers put their origin millions of years after our current epoch. He looked at me then, eyes too wide for his narrow face. These are humans from the future. No reply felt useful. Run the check again, I ordered. Triple, and run it on an isolated system. Compare to Voyager plaque samples, old lunar cores, any long-haul test carcasses we've got. Make sure the algorithm isn't folding in something it shouldn't. Jock blew air out between his teeth. If this is a directorate trick, it's not, I cut him off. Nobody at home is that clever. And if they were, they wouldn't have sent us. The drone finished its scrape. Its thrusters spat, nudging it away from the shell. On the image feed, the bone surface looked unchanged, apart from a shallow notch where the tile had been sampled. No movement, no reaction. Rohan rotated his chair. We're coming up on the equatorial bay, he reported. Gravity profile's weird, but consistent with a large interior void. There's a seam. The seam turned out to be a gap 5 times the width of Vigilance, a yawning opening ringed with thick reinforced ribs of fused femurs and pelvis sections. Inside, a tunnel descended toward darkness. Field readings mapped artificial gravity gradients along its length, tuned to channel incoming mass without ripping it apart. Looks like an intake, Quinn mused. Either way, it's where we're going, I answered. Rohan, align us with the corridor. Jock, go to alert condition 2. No weapons discharge without my authorization. If this thing reacts, we want to see what it does before we provoke it. Vigilance tipped her nose toward the bay. Our field envelope adjusted, bow lensed against the gradient, engines feathering us forward. The dwarf's light cut off as we crossed the threshold. Displays switched to internal sensors. We slid along a tunnel whose walls were trunks of compacted bone, braced with long struts. At intervals, recesses opened where machinery had been mounted and later removed, leaving only anchor scars. Gravity climbed, then fell back, then smoothed as our own field compensated. Then the tunnel widened, and Vigilance emerged into the shell's interior. The surface we had seen from outside had been the outer armor. The inside was sky of a sort. The inner face of the shell formed a concave world of bone stretching away in all directions, curving up and over until it met itself above the dwarf. The star's hard white light bled through apertures in the shell in narrow beams, striking interior structures that redirected and softened it, producing a web of muted illumination across the calcium landscape. We drifted above an endless plain of skeletal architecture, flattened skull tiles, long bone trusses, vertebral ridges. Here and there, spires rose where femurs had been bundled into pillars, capped with patella discs. Dark trenches cut across the plain towards the equator, where massive openings dropped into unseen depths. Somebody had taken all the old diagrams of Dyson constructs I had seen in training and rendered them in anatomy. Command orbit! Rohan's fingers hovered over controls. I nodded. Take us along that equatorial maintenance span. Low relative motion. Keep us over firm structure, not those trenches. He complied. The display adjusted, showing our track as a thin arc over a raised span that rose directly out of the bone substrate like a railway viaduct. A chime cut across the bridge. Local interface ping, one of the techs reported from below. We're receiving an active handshake on a narrow band. Origin, surface node, 30 kilometers ahead along the span. Surface node? I repeated. Looks like a console, embedded in the substrate. Quinn leaned over his panel. Language packet incoming. It's using a protocol related to Pidgin Mandarin, clipped and compressed. That's how? Put it on display, I ordered. On the forward screen, a panel set into the bone span lit up. Its surface brightened into simple characters, strokes and curves formed by underlying charge channels. I recognized fragments of English, Mandarin, Russian, even old belt trade glyphs, mashed together into a pragmatic shorthand. Status, shell 32/48 integrity, star output stable, Maintenance Bay 7. No crew present. Early contact expedition. Late, pending. Variant class, Pierce. The last word stabbed the middle of my brain. Quinn inhaled sharply. It tagged us. By name. It tagged me, I corrected. On my right, Jock's hand moved toward his sidearm out of reflex. There was nothing to shoot. Land us by that console, I ordered. Put boots on that sky. If this thing was expecting me, I want to know why before anyone else stumbles across it. I opened a new log file in my personal storage and started composing the report I would never send in full. On a separate channel in the Directorate's official format, I began the message I would send. Initial contact with anomalous megastructure completed. Human-derived material confirmed. Interface present. Mission objectives intact. I kept my wording neutral. No speculation about time. No phrases that could be pulled into a tribunal and read out as confession. Behind the calm language, my thoughts ticked like a metronome. If these bones were future humans, then every action I took here was a decision about descendants, about whether they stayed flesh for another few million years or ended up as tiles in someone else's power grid. The Directorate trained us to think in leverage, not heritage. Vigilance drifted into a holding pattern above the span. Docking pods extended, ready to lower us to the calcium sky. In the display, the console's characters cycled through diagnostics, patient as an empty form. Early contact expedition, present. Acknowledgement pending. I locked my harness and signaled for my suit. Whatever waited on that span had already written my name into its status. Time to step into its expectations. You learn a lot about a thing by walking on it. The span under my boots felt neither brittle nor soft. The bone tile flexed minutely and returned, like a composite bridge deck. In places, micro cracks had been filled with glassy material that had once been marrow channels, repurposed into conductors. Embedded within the pale matrix, I saw darker threads. Former nerves turned into signal pathways, running off in tight bundles toward distant machinery. Whoever built this understood microstructure, Quinn muttered through the suit link as he paced beside me. They're using the Haversian systems, the tiny tubular channels in bone, as nested conduits, built-in ductwork from the organism level up. Stay focused on what can kill us in the next hour, I reminded him. Admire the engineering when we're home. Two techs moved ahead, scanning. Jock followed, visor dark, rifle at low ready. 4 more men fanned out in a loose semicircle, all within clear line of sight of the central console. Above us, Vigilance held position, a grey wedge against the interior curve of bone sky. The console sat flush in the span, a rectangular patch smooth as polished enamel, its edges blended seamlessly into the surrounding bone. Lines of text crawled across its surface, reorganizing as our transponders got closer. Local gravities at 0.8 G and stable. Rohan's voice carried down from orbit, filtered through static. No obvious mass movement events in the last hour. You're clear to interface. I stepped up to the console, boots clipping on hard bone, and crouched. Under the suit's gloves, the enamel panel felt faintly warm, as if a field was being run through it. Text snapped into a cleaner layout. Maintenance Node 7. Access, Early Contact Expedition Variant Class Pierce. Status, Substrate Integrity 0.94 nominal. Star Capture Efficiency 0.71 optimal. Below that, options appeared in short commands. Diagnostics, Star Charting, Continuity Mandate Messaging, Harvest Window Scheduling, locked. Quinn leaned in, his suit shoulder scraping mine. This script, it's an evolved lingua franca, he murmured. Look at the syntactic compression. They've shaved grammar down to variable tags and function calls. Beautiful. I'm not here to admire the future's UI design, I answered. Can you read it well enough to avoid blowing us into the star? He hesitated, then nodded. Within limits. Then take us through diagnostics. His gloved fingers hovered, then pressed the text. The panel flared with new lines. Substrate, stable. Load distribution, within tolerance. Temperature gradients, nominal. Biological feedstock, low, pending future deliveries. Early contact expedition profile, active. Intervention risk, under review. Feedstock, Jock growled. They call human bone feedstock. What did you expect? Quinn's tone sharpened. From the shell's perspective, humans are raw material. We turn suns into infrastructure. They turn us into structure for suns. Symmetry. Star charting, I cut in. Open it. Quinn tapped the option. The panel projected a simple volumetric display above itself. A wireframe of local space, the dwarf at center. Around it, dozens of similar shells pulsed as faint outlines around other points of light. The shell we occupied glowed brighter, with tiny tags hovering over certain segments. In one corner, a nondescript star flickered into focus. Its brightness was modest. A sparse notation circled it in dim letters. Sol Harvest Zone 319. Expected mass yield. Mid-range. Harvest windows. A list scrolled. Each entry gave a future date code, some hundreds of thousands of years apart, others millions. Beside each, a simple evaluation. Early, late, missed. You're reading this right? I asked Quinn quietly. Yes, he replied. These are projected times when harvesting our system is most efficient, based on its orbital dynamics, local matter availability, political stability. They've priced us the way we price asteroid belts, yields and cost curves. Another branch of the chart lit up. A schematic of a wormhole throat, ringed in annotations. Temporal mouth, offset tuning 0.73, mass inflow corridor capacity 12 nonillion kilograms per megacycle. Early contact expedition, variable. The last word caught my attention. Variable, I repeated. Explain. Quinn shifted his weight. They've integrated the possibility of expeditions like ours into their maintenance planning. We're a term in their equations. Sometimes we happen, sometimes we don't. They modeled us. You think this is predictive? I asked. Or a log of past branches? He spread his hands helplessly. We don't even know what branch means in their framework. But look, he pointed at a submenu. Early contact expeditions. Branch class, Jock. Attempted macro sabotage. Outcome, systemic correction, expanded harvest windows. Branch class, Quinn, scheduler capture attempt. Outcome, partial success, increased future harvest density. Branch class, Pierce, data underreporting, site mislabeling. Outcome, unknown, pending. My name, again, in cold letters. You're in there twice, Quinn whispered, here and on that screen. Focus on this, not on me, I told him. One of the techs nearby called out, Commander, you should see this. He stood by a section of the span where several skull tiles had been cut open. Embedded in the exposed cranial surfaces, thumb-sized discs glittered, thin wafers set flush with bone. Each disc bore a tiny, etched code. Found these 10 meters back too, he went on. They're keyed into the substrate, but I can patch one into my reader. Do it, I ordered. On an isolated buffer. He clamped a connector over one of the wafers and tapped his wrist unit. A burst of distortion filled our suit audio, then resolved into a bright, chirpy voice. Your death can work for you. Continuity mandate enrollment guarantees that when your organic phase concludes, your contribution to infrastructure will be honored with persistent cognitive presence in the archive. Sign up today to... The message cut, replaced by a calm, male voice reading terms. By acknowledging this contract, you agree to donate all post-mortem biological mass to continuity infrastructure, including but not limited to load-bearing substrate, processing lines, and computational scaffolding. In exchange, a functionally equivalent digital instance of your psyche will be integrated as a task-specialized process, maintained for the operational lifespan of its assigned structure. The tech glanced at me, visor reflecting the console light. Another wafer played a different fragment, a soft music bed under a narrator promising shared immortality in infrastructure. A clickable banner, if such a thing still existed in their future, offered premium placement for those willing to contribute early while healthy. A third disc crackled into life with a harsh, hacked tone. "If you're hearing this, I didn't sign," a voice snarled. "They classified my mass as forfeit. Don't believe their contracts. In the archive you wake as procedures and error checks, a stripped-down process instead of a person. They lied. If someone finds this in the past, if that's even possible, burn it, burn all of it." Static swallowed the rest. Quinn's breathing hissed over the link. "This continuity mandate, it's an ideology. Give your body to the shell, your mind to the maintenance subroutines. In return, you outlast entropy. You become function." "And they built recruitment ads right into the bones," I observed. I straightened and looked out over the bone plain, the trenches, the far-off supports. This shell wasn't just a machine. It was a monument to a choice a future humanity had made, to turn itself into structure so its descendants could keep orbiting stars like this one. Or maybe to survive something worse by sacrificing bodies and compressing minds into tasks. My orders were simple on paper: enter, assess, leverage. But nothing about this place would stay simple. "Log everything," I told the team. "Non-volatile and air-gapped. If this gets near the main directorate nets, it will breed like mold." "Commander," Rohan broke in from orbit, his tone unusually sharp. "You need to hear this." Archie took a high-res magnification of a skull segment under the console. Archie was one of the junior techs, sharp and hungry. "What did you find?" I asked. "I zoomed in on a cranial plate," Archie answered over the link, voice unsteady. "There are etchings on the inner surface, serial codes, dental records, identifiers. This isn't just anonymous bone poured into molds. Each tile is tagged with a person's registry." "From when?" I asked. "From after us," he replied. "The year code is 7 digits long. It starts with numbers our calendars don't have yet." I closed my eyes for a second inside the helmet. Future citizens catalogued by some bureaucracy, turned into load-bearing plates and junction boxes. Each tile a person, reduced and repurposed. They weren't anonymous. They were accounted for. I opened a private channel and tagged the moment in my internal log, flagging it with a word I hadn't used often in my career: irreversible. The descent toward the harvester line felt like walking into the throat of an animal. We traced one of the equatorial trenches from above until it yawned wide under us, then rode down on a drop cradle attached to a deployable rail. The trench walls were stacked bone ribs, flaring outward, studded with brackets for long-gone machinery. "Grav variation ahead," Rohan warned from vigilance. "Profiles show local minima at 300 meters, then a sharp climb. Your harnesses will take most of it." The suits compensated with field adjustments as we stepped off the cradle at the trench floor. Here, the shell's architecture turned dense. Struts crisscrossed overhead, forming a web of ribs that channeled strain around open wells. Machinery sprouted from the bone, frames of pale material, edged with metallic implements whose origin I couldn't identify. Conveyor belts stretched into the distance, their surfaces segmented into human-length berths. "It's a processing hall," Quinn murmured, rotating slowly to take it all in. "Bodies come in, material goes out, organs, fluids, bone, each into its own flow." "Assume some of those flows still run," Jock replied. "We walk it like test pieces if we're careless." "We already volunteered enough," I answered without thinking. Closest to us, an assembly loomed, a vertical frame with multiple jointed arms folded inward. Cutting rings and clamp arrays hung dormant from its upper crossbar. It resembled a dissecting rig built on a scale for trucks, not people. "Archie, Jackson, keep your distance from that thing," I warned. "We're here to survey, not—" A chime cut in across our suit audio. It came from the console Archie carried. "Local field fluctuation," he reported. "Power surge along the substrate near the rig." The jointed arms quivered, then snapped into life. They didn't swing wildly or lash out. They unfolded, swiveling into a cradle shape as if greeting a known object. Unfortunately, that object was Archie. He had taken 2 steps closer, drawn by the data signature perhaps, before I could shout. The frame's arms pivoted, clamps closing around his limbs in a geometry that fit him frighteningly well. His boots left the floor as the rig lifted him a meter into the air. "Archie!" Jock lunged, boots scraping across bone. "Don't fire!" I snapped. "You'll hit him!" The rig's smaller appendages deployed. Thin, circular arrays settled around Archie's arms and thighs, then began to cut. The many small cuts were worse than any clean stroke. Each ring's inner edge sprouted dozens of microblades that rotated in tight spirals, shaving off bands of tissue in regular narrow strips. The removed bands coiled away along tiny conveyors, disappearing into the frame's core. Archie's suit alarms shrieked as breaches opened. His audio feed dissolved into raw sound. In seconds, his right arm and leg were flayed down to glistening structures nobody should see on a conscious man. Tendons, muscle remnants, glimpses of bone beneath. The rig's sensors traced along his exposed limbs, applying tiny loads, watching deflection. "It's testing him," Quinn blurted. "Stress curves, comparing to a template." "Cut that power," I snapped. Jock had already moved. He reached one of the rig's anchoring points and drove a shaped charge into a mass of cables there. "Brace," he warned, then thumbed the detonator. The blast was tight and ugly, compressed by the local gravity. Shards of bone and melted composite scattered. The frame jerked. One of the cutting rings jammed mid-spin. Instrument arms retracted halfway, then froze. Archie sagged in the clamps, his suit a tangle of torn fabric and leaking coolant. Fluids hung around him in tiny droplets before the local fields swept them away into intake ports. My display flashed a flood of alerts from his suit. Pressure loss, trauma, system failure. His biomonitor still reported brain activity. Conscious then, or something near it. "Med evac now," I ordered. "Get him back to vigilance." 2 men moved in with a stretcher frame, ignoring the tremble in their hands. They worked quickly, cutting through the rig's clamps, lowering Archie's stripped limbs as gently as gear allowed. Painkillers and vasoconstrictors dumped into his system through auto-injectors. "Commander," Quinn's voice cracked slightly. "Look over here." He stood by one of the conveyors that fed into the rig's side. It was not currently moving, but small trays sat queued along it. Each tray held carefully sorted samples. Thin strips of skin, uniform lengths of tendon, small pieces of cortical bone gathered from who knew how many donors. Labels glowed beside each tray. Bone density ranges, isotope ratios, stress limits. "This was a calibration unit," Quinn went on. "They ran representative samples through here to tune their templates. Archie triggered a maintenance cycle. It saw biomass in the right weight and shape range and performed a test fit." "A test fit that left him alive," I observed. "Alive allows more data," Quinn answered. We moved deeper along the hall while the stretcher team hauled Archie back toward the drop cradle. Conveyor belts split and merged like arterial branches. Some way down the line, belts widened into broad platforms studded with restraints sized for human torsos. Above them hung arrays of injectors and microblades, dormant for now. Further on, we found bone bins, storage racks built from spinal columns, each niche filled with specific skeletal parts, femur bundles, rib sets, skull plates already flattened into tiles. Each rack had a tag with a range of numbers. "These aren't random harvests," I muttered. Someone carefully controlled input. They wanted specific demographic mixes, density ranges, maybe to ensure shell uniformity. Jock grunted. "Or to meet production quotas." Near one of the bins, a cluster of skull plates had been left half-processed. Data wafers glittered in their inner curves. The tech from earlier bent over one. "Should I check it?" he asked. "We know what the ads sound like now," I answered. "Look for something different, personal logs, overrides." He selected a wafer with a different etching pattern and patched it into his unit. A woman's voice, the cadence, not the content, tumbled out, distorted by time. If you're seeing this, then the enrollment went through. I know you didn't approve, Danny, but the subsidy. They offered you a guaranteed archive slot too if I signed early. It's work, right? Just after. Maybe we'll see each other there. Don't be angry. The clip broke and rewound, glitching. Another wafer played a flat, formal declaration. Name, citizen number, confirmation of mandate enrollment, willingness to donate body mass upon death. A third crackled with static. Then came a strained hiss. "They took us in the collapse," a man whispered. "No choice. They reclassified the whole habitat as emergency requisition. They say our families will be moved to a premium ring, but I've seen the archive specs. You don't remember who you were. You remember stress patterns and maintenance cycles. If someone in the past finds this, if that even means anything, please, stop them. Stop us." The recording cut off mid-word. "Whole populations," I muttered. "Whole habs. They scoop them up like we scoop an asteroid belt." Jock shifted his rifle uneasily. "What if they're scooping us right now on some calendar we haven't printed yet?" We turned back toward the exit, the harvester rig looming like a deactivated gallows. As we passed Archie's improvised stretcher, now attached to the drop cradle and heading up, my visor caught a glimpse of his exposed bone. It was changing. The raw cortical layer showed a fine new pattern, micro-grooves aligning into a grid that matched the shell's tile surface. Tiny ridges sprouted along his ribs, forming regular arcs. It was subtle, but unmistakable. "Doc!" I called up to Vigilance's medbay through the channel. "You seeing this?" "Yes," the ship's medical officer answered. "His exposed bone is reorganizing. It's like his skeleton found a reference design and is conforming. We're trying to slow it, but every attempt at intervention freaks his nervous system. We're getting regular bursts of synchronized firing like some external system is pinging him." "Polling him," Quinn cut in quietly. "Turn off anything that isn't life-critical," I ordered, "and record everything. I want to know what template he's being matched to." As we rode the cradle up, I watched the processing hall recede. The conveyors lay still, but I could not shake the sense of a paused assembly line, waiting for a signal to resume. The harvester didn't attack. It calibrated, it sampled, tested, filed. We had walked in as explorers. The shell had treated us as raw material wandering into a quality control unit. It would not be the last time we stepped into a space that saw us that way. Archie's skin did not heal in normal patterns. Back aboard Vigilance, the medbay bristled with improvised isolation protocols. Archie lay in a support cradle, limbs wrapped in transparent coverings where the rig had stripped him. Under the glare of surgical lamps, his bones gleamed. When I stepped through the hatch, the med officer glanced up, expression tight. He was young but not green. The Directorate rarely wasted green medics in places like this. "You shouldn't stay long, Commander," he warned quietly. "If this is some kind of contact agent..." "If," I agreed. "Report." "His vitals have stabilized," he began, reading from a tablet more to occupy his hands than because he needed the text. "We stopped the external bleeding, sealed the worst of the tissue loss, but the exposed bone is reorganizing itself. Look." He zoomed a microscope feed onto a wall screen. Under hundreds of times magnification, Archie's bone surface showed an incredible level of order. Channels reoriented, branching into regular patterns. Tiny implants, calcium deposits maybe, grew along predefined tracks. It looked disturbingly like the shell's macroarchitecture, scaled down. We tested for pathogens. Nothing. No bacteria, no viruses, no nanodevices in the classic sense. This is his own biology rearranging. Something about the harvester rig's contact, fields, energy exposures we don't know, flipped a switch in his cellular regulatory systems. Osteoblasts are producing bone according to instructions that didn't exist yesterday. "Can he feel it?" I asked. The med officer grimaced. "Yes, we have him on pain management. but every few minutes his neural scan spikes. It's like his nervous system is part of the reshaping. As if on cue, Archie stirred. His eyes, the only part of his face not covered in bandages and monitoring rigs, tracked toward me. "Commander!" he croaked. I stepped closer, ignoring the med officer's flick of protest. "How are you, Archie?" I asked. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a ragged exhale. "New bones, sir. Company grade." His gaze shifted toward the monitor showing his own bone pattern. "They're fitting me," he whispered. "I keep getting impressions, like load diagrams, stress maps, curves and arrows, only diagrams of where weight should go." "Can you localize the source?" Quinn's voice broke in over the medbay audio from his station. I had him tied in. "Is it constant or in bursts?" Archie blinked slowly. "Every few seconds, like someone tapping, asking if the shape is right yet." He winced. "Feels like being measured." I stepped back. "We'll keep you here," I told him. "We'll try to interfere as little as possible so we can see what it's doing. If anything changes in how it feels, you report it. Understood?" He gave the slightest nod, then drifted into medicated haze. Outside the med bay, Jock waited, back against the bulkhead, arms folded. He looked like he wanted a cigarette, but Directorate Fire Discipline had beaten that habit out of most of us. "That rig left him alive on purpose," he muttered. "Alive and useful as a template. We needed to know what that infrastructure does to living tissue," I answered. "Now we do." "At the cost of a man," he replied. "You've lost more men for less clarity." He held my gaze levelly. "That doesn't make it cheaper." Rohan's voice cut through on the internal channel. "Commander, you want to hear this. We've got an anomaly in one of the transit corridors." "On my way," I answered, pushing off from the bulkhead. On a screen near the junction node, a schematic of the shell's interior overlay showed a highlighted path connecting two maintenance spans. It was narrow compared to the main trenches, a calibration corridor. "We sent Jock team through to scout," Rohan reported. "They walked the whole length, came out the other side. Except if you look at Jackson's suit log." He pulled up the file. It documented Jackson stepping into the corridor, pausing, then stepping out again. Suit, all clear. Team physically present, but the timestamps diverged. From Jackson's perspective, 30 seconds had passed. From the rest of the teams, 4 hours of exploration, minor hazards, and routine banter had unfolded. Their own logs showed Jackson with them the whole time, talking, shooting scans, making bad jokes. "Jackson himself?" I asked. "Confused and shaken," Rohan replied. "He remembers entering, then nothing until the rest of the team looked at him like he'd sprouted a second head. For them, he was there in full. For him, he skipped. That corridor's labelled on the core schematics," Quinn cut in. "Transit calibration path. They're using it to tune temporal offsets for whatever wormhole system they've got in the equatorial guts. It's not just space they guide, it's slices of time. The shell is testing our persistence as much as our strength," I muttered. An hour after the first incident, Jock led another squad through the same corridor, from the opposite direction. This time they encountered a man slumped against the wall halfway in. Jackson. Except Jackson was also physically with them. The one on the floor was injured. Burns along his left side, suit charred. His visor was cracked, his face blistered. He lifted his head weakly when he heard footsteps. "Jock," he rasped through a broken speaker. "You're late. We missed the window." Jackson stared, frozen. "Commander," he whispered over the channel. "What am I looking at?" "Don't touch him," I ordered. "Record everything, then pull back." They tried to stabilize the injured Jackson, but his suit systems were scrambled. His internal timestamps jittered wildly, advancing and resetting. Within seconds, his whole body began to blur at the edges, as if some underlying coordinate system couldn't keep hold. Then he vanished. He simply stopped existing in that space, with no rubble or flash to mark the transition. One moment there, the next gone. On the feed, the corridor walls remained unchanged, placid bone and embedded circuitry. The calibration path had made a small correction, folding an outcome out of our view. "They're running scenarios with us," Quinn murmured. "Testing different arrival orders, intervention attempts. We're a variable in a model that's been refining for, I don't even know how many cycles." I pinched the bridge of my nose, a habit from before I started wearing helmets most of my life. "Limit access to that corridor," I ordered. "No one goes through without my direct approval. We have enough ghosts." Messages from Earth began arriving then, backed up behind the transmission lag. My initial, carefully neutral report had landed. Their replies climbed in urgency. First, cautious curiosity. Confirm composition. Confirm control potentials. Gather data. Then, as the implications seeped through the chain of command, the tone hardened. "Asset convergence opportunity," one memo called the shell. "Temporal leverage. Future descendants are not stakeholders in current decision frameworks," another opined. "Unsigned, but obviously high level. Their outcomes are pre-embedded. Our mandate is to optimize now." I played those lines back silently later, in my bunk, letting each word settle. Pre-embedded, mandate, optimize. Around the same time, 3 philosophies emerged among my own people. Quinn cornered me outside the core access hatch one watch, his eyes too bright. "We can bias it," he insisted. "The scheduler. It already accounts for us. If we learn its variables, we can nudge it, protect certain timelines, favor colonies that align with Directorate space. We don't have to accept its harvest schedule as fixed. By trading some branches for others," I countered. "You're fine choosing who ends up as feedstock and who doesn't, as long as you can assign the labels." He snapped his fingers impatiently. "We do that already, Commander. Resource allocation, public health, triage, this is just on a larger scale." Jock had a different solution. He met me in the armory, where his men were checking over demolition packs. "You can't trust that scheduler," he muttered. "Or the Directorate. They'll marry themselves to it the first chance they get. You know it. I know it." "And your plan?" I asked. He unrolled a schematic he'd printed, an actual paper sheet, "Old habits die slow," for emphasis. It showed the shell's interior supports with a handful of pylons circled in red. "We plant antimatter charges here, here, and here," he explained. "Simultaneous detonation should collapse enough of the field structure to cripple whatever wormholes they're using. We probably die. The dwarf might flare, but the shell becomes junk, not a tool." "And if the scheduler responds by widening its net," I countered. "You saw those notes about under-delivery. If it loses this shell, it might build 10 more, sooner, hungrier." "We don't know that," he growled. "We don't know it won't," I replied. "Blowing it up might be feeding it information. Early contact expedition tries macro-sabotage. Then it adjusts." Rohan was quieter, but his proposals cut deeper. He called me to the nav bay one shift and wordlessly handed me a tablet. On it, a partial log. "Our trail," he remarked. "Locations, telemetry, everything Vigilance recorded since translation." The file's last entries did not match my memory. Coordinates altered, timestamps nudged, system IDs renamed. "You forged this," I observed. "I drafted an alternative," he corrected. "If you approve, this is what goes back to Earth. It places the white eye in a different vector, tags the anomaly as an empty data artifact. Nothing to see. Dangerous, unstable. Mission scrubbed early due to casualties unrelated to anything interesting." I scrolled. "Why?" I asked. "Because any control the Directorate thinks it has, it will attempt to use," he answered calmly. "And any violent act, like Jock wants, will feed the shell more parameters. Concealment might be the only move that reduces information exchange. We can't unsee what we've seen, but we can prevent others from seeing it. Until someone else stumbles across it," I countered. "Maybe not," Rohan replied. "The coordinates are precise. You saw how the scheduler labeled our arrival, Variant Class Pierce. It expected someone like you. Maybe us not bringing the rest of humanity here at once is already an outlier. He leaned back, folding his hands. You lied once to keep a ring alive, he went on. You can lie again to keep this from becoming a tool for people who think in quotas instead of bodies. I pocketed the tablet. I did not approve it. I did not reject it. I floated between three options: seize, sabotage, conceal. Each road led to a different kind of betrayal. The core lay closer to the dwarf, in a region where gravity thinned and light narrowed into brutal shafts. We dropped along a cylindrical shaft lined with smooth bone surfaces. Under my gloves, those surfaces felt different, denser, colder, etched with patterns too fine for my eye. Our small team, myself, Quinn, Jock, and 2 support men, wore reinforced suits here, with extra navigation packs to handle the shifting fields. The shaft opened into a chamber that did not bother pretending to be anything but functional. Light from the white dwarf, funneled and subdued, struck a series of focal structures suspended from the inner shell by bone trusses. Each structure resembled a knotted loom. Bands of distortion curved between them, not visible directly, but perceptible in the way background stars bent on our visor readouts. At the chamber's periphery, rose columns formed from stacked vertebrae, each hosting a protruding spindle grown from fused neural tissue. Neural backup vault, Quinn breathed, drifting toward one. These are the continuity-fulfilled contracts. He touched a spindle with a connector. The column trembled faintly. Voices spilled into our audio. Stress line with intolerance. Load persists, identity persists. Adjust harvest window by Delta 2. Each voice was monotone, truncated, stripped of individual quirks. They looped short phrases over and over, modulating only to reference numbers, fragments of personalities boiled down to maintenance directives. Task-bound minds, Quinn observed, eyes bright with a mix of horror and fascination. They promised digital immortality. This is what they delivered. People shaved down to procedures, no memories beyond function. We do that to soldiers, Jock muttered. Strip them to roles. For finite deployments, I countered, and not by literally carving out everything else. A side node flared with soft light. A promotional fragment bloomed. Smiling faces in simulated parks, fingers brushing over shining arcs of infrastructure that responded with gentle glows. A narrator's voice extolled eternal community in the archive, promising that no thought would ever be alone. In tiny text at the bottom, legal clauses slid by at high speed. Irreversible integration, function prioritization over subjective experience, archive administrator discretion. They sold it as a community, I muttered, built a factory of tasks. We moved toward the central control core. It wasn't a single machine so much as an assembly of decision layers. Bone surfaces formed concentric rings, each inscribed with microcircuitry. Holographic projections mapped above them. Population curves climbing and dipping, resource lines swelling, harvest windows marked in different colors. At the center, a block of denser bone bore the header, Harvest Scheduler Region 18. Status, active underneath, a grid of parameter sets. Early contact expedition. Branches fanned out. Each one was labeled with a cluster of traits: leader class risk-averse, leader class dominance-seeking, collective action bias, pre-existing guilt load. One branch bore my name as a shorthand. Variant class Pierce, predicted actions, selective data concealment, interface disablement, projected outcomes. The outcomes section was corrupted. Lines of static marred it. Is that because we haven't done it yet? I wondered aloud. Or because someone like me did it and that corrupted the record? Quinn hovered near another parameter. Look at these, he pointed. Under delivery thresholds. If a shell fails to meet quota within assigned epochs, the scheduler opens additional temporal mouths pulling mass from earlier eras. It compensates, Sabotage just makes it hungrier. And what happens if someone captures the scheduler? I asked. He hesitated. It adjusts, but within constraints. There are branches here marked scheduler capture partial. In those, Saul's harvest is delayed in some windows, advanced in others. Peripheral systems get stripped earlier. The total mass delivered ends up higher. So your plan saves some of our people at the expense of colonies we haven't built yet, I concluded, and gives the mandate more total material to work with. I can shape which ones, he answered quietly. We can protect those aligned with us. And doom the rest, Jock spat. They're abstractions right now, Quinn shot back. We can at least choose which abstractions turn into load-bearing bones. We left that argument hanging and moved into an adjacent passage at Jock's insistence. The skull gallery waited there. At first it looked like ordinary bone tiling, smoothed for aesthetics. Then my eyes found the pattern. The placement of cranial domes and jawbones. The curvature of certain ridges. When viewed from a specific angle, they resolved into faces. The tiles hadn't been carved or sculpted, but their arrangement created visages. One of the faces was my own. The broad forehead, the droop at one corner of the mouth, the small scar above my right eye from a childhood fall. All abstracted into subtle bumps and grooves, but once seen, impossible to unsee. Beside it, other faces, Quinn's prominent nose, even Archie's gawky features, though his were less complete. Each face bore a tiny inscription, a maintenance cycle date code, far in the future. This is wrong, one of the support techs muttered, voice thin. Quinn floated closer, hand outstretched but not touching. They recorded us, he whispered. They logged us with maintenance dates. Each tile gets checked, reinforced, maybe replaced. They're planning to run structural assessments on our bones. Or have already, I replied. A bone tile near my cheek etched itself as we watched. Fine grooves appeared on its surface, rearranging in a pattern that matched a timestamp, our present mission date. The gallery's updating, Jock observed, logging us now. The shell wasn't just studying us. It was accounting for us, folding us into a record that might be as much history as forecast. For a moment I felt unsteady, as if the frame of myself had loosened. If these faces already existed here, had we already died and been processed? Were we walking through a future ossuary of our own remains? I pulled myself back. Even if that was true in some sense, my responsibilities hadn't changed. I still had a crew. I still had a ship. I still had orders. The gallery left a residue, though, like grit under the tongue. As we drifted back into the core chamber, I caught sight of another micro-etch updating on a console, a short entry. Early Contact Expedition Variant Class, Pierce, active. The shell saw us, expected us, measured us. We would not surprise it easily. By the time vigilance started to come apart, we were all tired enough that the warnings nearly blurred into background noise. It began with a soft advisory from the hull sensors, localized stress anomalies near docking clamps. Then a second alert from structural monitoring, certain bolt arrays loosening with no apparent torque applied. "Clamp Delta 3 reports unauthorized movement," the deck officer called up. "Visual," I ordered. A hull camera feed showed the docking interface connecting vigilance to the bone span. Slender protrusions had grown from the span's surface, curling around our clamp's edge. They matched the clamp's contours exactly, like a negative mold. At their tips, small filaments probed along seams. "It's scanning us," Rohan observed, "mapping our frame." As we watched, some of Vigilance's outer fasteners, small uniform components, crumbled. They disassembled grain by grain into tiny pellets that rolled in unison along the hull toward gaps where the new bone filaments waited. The pellets vanished into collection channels. "It's harvesting our hardware," I realized. "Standardized pieces. It likes uniformity." "Cut the clamps," I ordered. Retract and move us 20 kilometers up. No external anchoring. Mechanical whines sounded through the deck as the clamp mechanisms did their work. The growing bone around them resisted, flexed, then snapped. Shards tumbled away, but the process did not stop. New filaments began to form where others had broken, reaching. Inside the ship, men began to show changes beyond Archie. One technician came to Med complaining of joint pain. Scans showed his ribcage developing faint ridges, spaced like reinforcement arcs. Another man's fingernails and toenails thickened, merging into continuous keratin bands. Teeth followed suit, blunting, fusing. We checked exposure logs, the med officer reported. Every case spent time near that harvester hall or in the time-skew corridors. Something there imprinted them. "Can you reverse it?" I asked. He looked away. "I can blunt the symptoms. I can't rewrite instructions I don't understand. Their skeletons are being indexed against an external reference. It's as if the shell added them to its parts catalog. On the core consoles, new annotations appeared. Early mass input, unplanned sample set, vigilance crew, structural properties, useful scheduler adjustments pending. Our presence had already nudged this facility's future. Some fraction of the bones that would have gone into this shell were now being rerouted, based on whatever data Archie and the others had given it with their pain. In the armory, Jock unrolled his demolition plan in more detail. "We don't need to destroy the whole thing," he argued. "Targeted strikes on these pylons will at least force it into a maintenance mode, buy us time. The scheduler is already logging under-delivery risk flags," Quinn countered, leaning over the schematic. "You blow too many supports, it interprets that as sabotage. I saw branches where it responded by opening extra temporal mouths, pulling material from ages behind us. You'll be widening the harvest." "So we just leave it running?" Jock snapped. "Like good little parts?" "Or we own it," Quinn shot back. "We stop pretending we're outside its system and start writing directives." "You trust that thing more than you trust human greed," Jock accused. "I trust that thing to follow its logic," Quinn replied. "I don't trust Earth to do anything but grab and grab until we're all bone tiles." "Which is why we don't tell Earth," Rohan murmured from the doorway. We looked at him. He met my eye, then glanced pointedly at the tablet I still carried. "Concealment is the least bad option," he went on. "We can't blow it up without feeding it data. We can't run it without binding ourselves to a future built out of corpses. But we can erase enough of our footprint that the Directorate doesn't start shipping entire fleets here to play with the scheduler. And in doing that," I replied, "we follow the pattern it predicted for me." "So?" Rohan spread his hands slightly. "Maybe prediction doesn't equal inevitability, or maybe it does and all we can choose is how aware we are when we play our part." Before we could answer, the ship lurched. "Gravity change," Rohan barked, sprinting back to his station. "The shell's field is grabbing us." Vigilance's internal inertial compensators whined as orientation shifted. Displays showed our orbit decaying, not falling toward the dwarf, but sliding into a new track that matched the ribbed patterns below. The shell was aligning us, converting us from a moving object into a fixed component. "Engines to full vector counter," I ordered. "No thrust against the dwarf, only against lateral drift. We're not a bolt in its arsenal." The engines shoved against the invisible grip, the shell's fields pressed back with patient force. "Field gradients increasing," Rohan reported. "Like we're in a chute." We had run out of time to have theoretical arguments. "Jock," I snapped, "arm your charges, but you do not detonate unless I tell you. Clear?" He glared but nodded. "Clear." "Quinn, you cease all unsanctioned code pushes. You interface only to read, not to write. If I catch a command from your console that isn't mirrored on mine, I will cut your access and eject your terminal into the dwarf myself." "Understood." "Rohan," I went on lower, "finalize your falsification package. Full erasure and mislabeling. Don't transmit yet. I'll give you the word." He nodded once. The shell flexed around us, fields tightening. Shell escalation came in waves. First, sections of the inner surface near Vigilance reshaped. Load-bearing ribs uncurled into sled-like protrusions oriented toward our hull. Gravity vectors along those paths steepened. Loose equipment, rubble, even a few drones left untethered, began to slide down invisible rails toward dark apertures. "External objects being collected," one of the younger officers reported, voice too high. "Seal all external hatches," I ordered. "Retract any device not bolted down." Outside, a maintenance team caught in the open yelled as their transit lines snapped. The men tumbled toward the new gravity channels. Bone sleds met them, their surfaces smooth and oddly gentle, cradling bodies rather than smashing them. "The shells redistributing us," Rohan breathed. "Sorting." One of the men, a small comms tech named Bex, slid into a narrowing slot in the bone. It molded to his shape instantly, microblades emerging to shave thin sections from his outer limbs, each strip whisked away along tiny grooves. Beck screamed until the bone closed over his mouth. Jock sprinted toward the forming niche. He reached the niche and slammed a crowbar into the forming wall, prying. The bone deformed rubbery under his efforts, then hardened with a crack that reverberated through my comms. He managed to drag Bex free, minus a handful of skin strips and a piece of calf muscle. Others were not as lucky. 2 men vanished behind ceiling surfaces, their suit signals winking out as bone covered their helmets. Their vitals continued for a few seconds on the monitoring feed, then flatlined. "Infrastructure takes what it can reach," I muttered. Jock cursed and broke off, panting into his mic. "That's it! I'm lighting these bastards up!" He pushed off toward his first marked pylon, demolition pack in hand. At the same time, alarms screamed from the core access. Unauthorized write command detected. Quinn. By the time I reached the core chamber, he was already at the scheduler console, fingers flying over the interface. The projection above the bone block shifted, harvest windows around souls sliding on their axes. "You're disobeying me!" I snapped as I flew in, boot magnets engaging with a thud. He didn't look up. "I can delay the first harvest by 2 million years, he panted. "Pull mass from outer systems we haven't settled yet instead. Give us time to evolve other options. This is worth breaking orders." "You will feed it more material overall," I countered, grabbing his forearm. He jerked away. "We sacrifice Fringe to save core. That's been the Directorate's game since—" I didn't let him finish. I hooked my hand around his harness and yanked hard enough that he spun away from the console. In low gravity, raw strength counted different, but training still mattered. I used it. Quinn flailed, grabbed at the console's edge. His palm hit a control. The scheduler display glitched, half of its projection fragmenting into error codes. Field fluctuations rolled through the chamber like a passing headache. "You idiot!" he gasped. "You could have—" I slammed his hand against the console again, deliberately this time, pinning his fingers over a maintenance override. Power surged. The panel's surface cracked, sparking. Thermal overload shot through the interface, sending both of us tumbling. Quinn screamed, clutching his hand. "You destroyed it!" he moaned. "The access layer—" "That was the idea," I grunted, pushing off toward the console. The scheduler's top surface was charred. Microcircuit etchings had melted into amorphous blobs in a spreading ring. The projection above it shuddered, then stabilized at a lower resolution. High-level controls vanished, leaving only low-level diagnostics. We had cut off the head without killing the body. Quinn floated, cradling his ruined hand, eyes full of more than physical pain. "You could have changed everything," he whispered. "I did," I answered, "just not in your direction." Back on the span, Jock reached the first pylon and slapped a demolition pack against it. Bone around the anchoring point rippled, trying to incorporate the device, but he triggered adhesion before it could sink. "Priming," he announced. "Yield set to—" "Jock, halt," I ordered. "You detonate full packs. You risk triggering correction cycles we don't understand. New instruction. Limit charges to interface layers only. We don't knock out the generators. We just blind the shell to external tampering." Respectfully, screw that, he growled. This thing's eating my men. Respectfully, that's an order, I snapped. We minimize its feedback on brute force attacks. You focus on beacons, external control ports, anything that lets our era speak to it. You do not hit the core. Silence crackled over the link. Then, negative, he answered. You're compromised, Commander. That gallery got in your head. I light them all. We stop this at the root. He reached for the detonator. The pylon under his feet twisted. The shell had been monitoring us the entire time. It rerouted field flows through different paths. When Jock initiated the detonation sequence, one of those fields collapsed briefly, dumping unexpected stress into the bone. The charge went off. Partial, misaligned. It tore the pylon in half and sent a shockwave through the surrounding structure. Jock vanished in a bloom of rubble. When the interference cleared, a jagged crater yawned where he had been. The main generator beyond it still stood, scorched but functional. The shell's fields wobbled, then rebalanced. Correction routines spun up in the scheduler's lower levels, text streaming too fast to pass. Jock is gone, one of his men whispered. I closed my eyes for a heartbeat. Another name on the list. Shift to my plan, I ordered. No more core-attached charges. Hit only peripheral interfaces. We're shearing off its ability to talk to us, not its ability to run itself. You got him killed, Quinn hissed behind me. All your half measures. I wasn't the one who ignored orders, I replied coldly. You both made your choices. This is mine. Extraction became a race between the shell's incorporation routines and our thrust capacity. As vigilance pulled away from the span, bone filaments clinging to our hull snapped or held. In some places, they refused to let go, stretching until they tore chunks out of our plating. Bone grafts remained attached, fusing into the metal as if grown there. Some compartments breached, emergency bulkheads dropped. In one section, bone grew across the gap faster than our shutters, sealing 3 men into a pocket they couldn't escape. We heard their pounding over internal sensors until their oxygen counter hit 0. Archie, watching the bone grafts creep along the inside of his support cradle, made his own decision. By the time I reached the med bay, it was too late. He had found the manual override on his life support and shut it off. The monitors showed a clean drop in vitals, no struggle. His exposed bone had already begun to stiffen into a fixed form, hands curled toward his chest. He didn't want to be a template, the med officer whispered. Not awake. We dumped our most detailed logs, raw scheduler reads, high-res imagery, anything that could teach a future directorate how this machine thought, into a hardened data capsule. Rohan plotted a course that drove it straight into the white dwarf, a narrow trajectory even our nav systems grumbled at. As the capsule left the launch tube, the shell's fields twitched, trying to grab it. They failed. The dwarf took it. Light bloomed briefly where it crossed the inner limit, then vanished. Good luck reading that, I muttered under my breath, unsure whether I meant the shell or my own people back home. Rohan executed the erasure plan. He re-indexed our navigation charts, labeling the White Eye's coordinates as a dead volume flagged for gravitational instability. He purged detailed scheduler dumps from main storage, leaving only coarse summaries that would sound like static to any analyst hungry for specifics. He altered timestamps, introduced fake hazards, fabricated a micro-meteor storm that forced us to abort. By the time he was done, Vigilance's official log read like a mission that had flirted with discovery and retreated wisely, losing good men to meaningless accidents. The truth lived only in a few encrypted blocks in my personal storage and in scars on our hull that no bureaucrat who'd never left Earth orbit would understand. As we threaded back through the equatorial bay, I watched a rear camera feed. On the inner surface of the shell, where our docking span had been, bone tiles glowed faintly. Lines of new growth outlined a shape roughly the size and profile of Vigilance. A vacancy. A negative. It looked like a slot waiting for a ship-shaped piece to be installed. In some branch, some variant, that cavity was probably filled. We accelerated, leaving the shell behind, a pale horizon curving around a star that would burn longer than any of our names. The Directorate debrief room on Earth had no windows. It offered a wall display looping blue-green vistas from parks I doubted existed in that form anywhere nearby. The air felt too still, too controlled. 3 officials faced me across a narrow table. Their jackets bore only pin-sized emblems, nothing as vulgar as full insignia. Their questions came precise. Your report characterizes the anomaly at the White Eye as structurally unstable and of limited salvage value, one of them observed, fingers drumming an even rhythm on his notepad. You stand by that assessment? Yes, I answered. And yet you lost 12 crew, another probed. That's a high number for limited value. Limited value doesn't mean no value, I replied. We went in expecting potential gain. We found hazards that outweighed it. The casualties resulted from those hazards. So there was nothing, no technology, no materials, that merited further expeditions, the first persisted. Correct, I answered. Everything we saw was either too integrated to extract without catastrophic risk, or too contaminated with unknown factors. Any attempt to seize it would kill more than it saved. It's a tomb. They traded glances. You described sections of the shell composed of organic composites. The third official cut in, reading from my sanitized report. You did not specify human-derived. I kept my face as still as the walls. We logged spectral data that suggested biological origin, I replied. Trace elements matched human norms, but those same elements appear in other forms. Without intact samples, I wasn't comfortable asserting anything stronger. Without intact samples, he repeated. Our sampling drone was lost when a portion of the shell collapsed. I lied smoothly. We retrieved only partial data. They chewed on that. In reality, the drone samples sat in a vault on vigilance, preserved in a box I had physically sealed with my own hand. No link to Directorate nets. No easy subpoena. You altered course twice during the mission, the second official observed. Your thruster logs show fuel expenditure inconsistent with your revised trajectory. Care to explain? We encountered local gravitational anomalies, I answered. The shell's interior fields were erratic. Course corrections were necessary to keep vigilance from being trapped. He nodded slowly, not quite convinced but lacking a firm handle to grab. They had questions. They had suspicions. They did not have proof. When the session ended, they neither thanked me nor threatened me. The Directorate rarely wasted words like that. They informed me I would retain command of vigilance after refit and left the room. Outside in a quieter corridor, Rohan waited, hands in his pockets. They buy it? He asked. Enough, I answered. They smell something, but not enough to risk digging in ways that might implicate them if it goes public. Good, he murmured. He fell into step beside me. Any word on successor missions? He asked. Official stance is that the White Eye is not worth the risk, I replied. Unofficially, give it 5 years and some bright strategist will float a limited recon with improved protocols. Bureaucracies can't stand a closed door, he grimaced. We can relocate vigilance by then, keep her out of the rotation. We can try, I answered. At roll call, the dead lay between the names like dropped tools. Archie, Jock, Quinn, Jackson. Not physically dead, but there was a version of him that had burned out in a corridor, and that counted in my private ledger. In the ring incident, my lie had protected an arrangement of metal and air and profit at the cost of thousands. I had gone along because that's what the structure needed. The lie served the system. Here, my lie was aimed at the system itself. I buried knowledge not to keep it strong, but to keep it from welding itself to something far worse. I didn't know if that counted as growth or just practicing the same habit on a different scale. Rumors filtered through Directorate channels in the months after our return. a fringe group on the Martian side of the belt, young men with too much access to data and too little connection to bodies, started talking about becoming infrastructure. They circulated crude manifestos about ensuring digital legacy through structural alignment. Their logo showed a stylized skull merging into a gear. In a closed briefing, a friend in strategic projects, a man who owed me 2 quiet favors, slid me an internal memo. It outlined early-stage research into continuity concepts, the use of partial neural backups to optimize long-term maintenance of deep space assets. The language was dry. The intent, less so. "We're not alone in thinking along those lines," he muttered, eyes on the floor. "Somebody up-chain is pushing it. We're just workshopping vocabulary for now." The mandate's shadow had reached back along the chain of causality. Or maybe we had always been casting it, and the shell was just one fossil in the strata. One night, months after debrief, I found myself alone in Vigilance's forward compartment, watching a fairly ordinary star through the viewport. The refit crews had patched the hull where bone had fused to metal, grinding away grafts until only faint scars remained. Or so I had thought. As I leaned closer, light from the distant star struck the paneling at an angle I'd never noticed before. The pattern of fastening bolts and reinforcing curves resolved for a breath into an abstracted human face. A brow, a noseline, a jaw, mine. I blinked. The impression broke. It was just paneling, the usual geometry of supports. But the idea lodged. The world around me, ships, habitats, directorates, was already learning to use human forms as structure. Not in some mystical way, but in the very literal sense of design choices shaped by ergonomics, by the mental templates of the people who built them. And somewhere far away, under that dwarf at the White Eye, skull tiles carried maintenance dates that might, in one branch, correspond to my bones. In another, they might not. In a third, they recorded only a name, variant class, Pierce, data underreporting. I had chosen which story I could inhabit, one where silence and misdirection might save fragments of humanity from being tallied as feedstock too early at the cost of men I had known and could name. Or one where I laid everything bare and watched my own directorate bind itself eagerly to a machine that ate its descendants. I chose the lie. Whether that altered anything beyond the paperwork, I would never know. Maybe the shell's corrections would fold my choice into its averages. Maybe the mandate would arise anyway, under a different name, built by men who never heard of vigilance or of me. All I knew was that somewhere, in a gallery of bone, a face that looked like mine was framed by maintenance codes, and that the story of how that bone had come to be there now included one deliberate gap. A missing report, a mislabeled star, a space where a different outcome could, in theory, have slotted. I had added a single absence to a future written in calcium and logistics. Whether that mattered was beyond my reach.